And we wanted to kick off this morning's conversation by having this joint roundtable so that we could get to some of the big questions that both of these initiatives are addressing. I think both of us are, we've done, both the AHA and the MLA have done some work already, we've made some progress, and along the way, there was a problem we wanted to solve, but we've bumped into things that have questions that need to be answered, issues that need to be addressed, or that we didn't quite realize when we started, much like writing a dissertation. So it turns out that we're actually well prepared to think through that, and we want to do some of that with you today. And so we've assembled this roundtable of various perspectives. So let me just go over the run of show very briefly. We have about an hour and 15 minutes for this session. We would like to spend 45 minutes sort of unpacking things up here together in a conversational way, and then leave a good half hour, at least half an hour, to bring you into the conversation and have some Q&A. So if you have things that you want to talk about or things come up, we want to make sure that there's time for that. But I ask you to be brief because we do want to have a conversational tone, and so if you're asking a question, please be succinct so that we can all engage with it. Rebecca has introduced my fellow panelists, so I don't need to reintroduce you. You'll hear more about all of us, I think, as we talk about what brought us to these projects and what our work has been. But to actually begin the roundtable, we thought that especially there may be, well, actually, let me stop. How many of you are graduate students of any stripe? Okay, how many of you are history graduate students? And are there any language and literature graduate students? Stacy.
I have a whole audience.
So I think what we'll do is I'll be quite brief with the career diversity because I think you will be more familiar with that, and I'll let Stacy explain a little bit more about what Connected Academics is. They're parallel projects, but different because there's difference between the discipline of history and is it one discipline in language and literature or disciplines?
That is up for debate.
Yeah. Okay. So there's one, right? But we'd start first with just some overview of these projects, what they're doing on the national level. A great deal of you, I think, are familiar with History in Action, which is like the pilot program, the initiative, and a lot of the really important work is happening in these pilot programs in the departments in really rethinking what a doctoral education in history or language and literature looks like. But there's also some national level things that are being addressed. So let me, as a good historian, take you back to the beginning and tell you how we got to today. So the origin of the AHA's Career Diversity for Historians initiative actually is in 2011, and it's when the executive director of the AHA, Jim Grossman, and the then president of the AHA, Tony Grafton, co-wrote an article in our news magazine Perspectives called No More Plan B. And basically what it said was, this shouldn't be a plan B. This idea that there's success and then not good enough success, this is stupid. We should just let graduate students, we should be supporting their career choices, their career paths in all sorts of avenues and outcomes. And this article, which was kind of gutsy because nobody was really saying this, sort of landed and exploded, and there was this huge response. And not perhaps the response you might expect. There was not a lot of people saying, this is terrible, you're diluting the academy, this is a terrible idea. It was an outpouring of people, of PhD historians who were beyond the academy saying, thank God someone's saying this, how can I help? There were graduate students saying, thank God someone's saying this, how can I be involved? And so this made them sort of think, maybe we actually really hit on something. It turned out the Mellon Foundation was interested in this conversation. So they went and had a conversation with Mellon, and out of that initial conversation were two sort of planning grants, one to the AHA and one to the MLA, to say basically, there's an issue, but we need to know more about it. So what the AHA did with our planning grant money is we basically went out and gathered a lot of information. And there's two big takeaways that we got from this initial phase. The first is we collected some data. We took a sample of 2,500 history PhDs who got their degrees within a 10-year period. I think it's 1999 to 2008. The results of this survey or this sampling are online. You can find them on the AHA website. The title of the report is The Many Careers of History PhDs. But we found a couple of really important things in this data gathering. And the really one that's striking for where we went next was that we found a full 25% of history PhDs end up completely beyond the professoriate in a really dizzying array of fields. They end up in government, they end up in K-12, teaching, excuse me. They end up in museums and archives, but they also end up in business, they end up in consulting, they end up in nonprofits, they end up doing, a lot of them are entrepreneurs. They do basically anything that people do in the world. A history PhD also is involved. We didn't find any baristas, so that's also interesting to know. And so we thought, okay, this is a huge chunk of history PhDs that are not being adequately prepared for these careers that they enjoy, that they have. How can we change graduate education? So we asked them. We had a bunch of focus groups, and we said, what do you wish you had learned in grad school that would help you succeed in your career now? And we came away with 5 skills. The first is communication in a variety of media and to a variety of audiences. So in a blog, long form, short form, out loud, hopefully when your voice isn't dying because you've been talking for 2 weeks straight. Written communication, visual communication, all sorts of things. The second was collaboration, especially with people who don't share your worldview. So how do you actually collaboratively solve a problem? How do you have a conversation with someone who maybe doesn't see the world in the same fundamental way that you do? The third skill is the one that usually scares most historians and most humanists, I would say, and that's quantitative literacy. And it's important to note here that the bar is really low. What it means really is understanding, thank you, is understanding that numbers tell a story the same way that words and images and objects do, and that if someone gives you information in a quantitative format, you're able to engage with that information in a meaningful way. So communication, collaboration, quantitative literacy. The fourth is intellectual self-confidence, and that's the ability to say, I'm not the world's leading expert on that, but I can find out. I can go write that grant proposal for something that you just threw at me. I can write a blog post even though I've never done it before. Sure, I can figure out the voice of this publication and try to match it. Like that's the ability to pivot among many tasks. And then the final one, so we have communication, collaboration, quantitative literacy, and intellectual self-confidence. And the final one is not really a standalone skill, it's more of a thread that runs through the rest of them, and that's digital engagement or digital literacy. So that communication it happens in the digital world. Quantitative literacy obviously has a big digital component. Collaboration can also be obviously facilitated by things like Skype. So this sort of runs through all of it. And then I think the intellectual self-confidence, right? The ability to say, sure, I'll learn Excel, which by the way is awesome if you don't know Excel, so you should all learn it. So these are the 2 big pieces of information we walked away with. A big chunk of history PhDs end up beyond the academy and have careers that they enjoy, and that we could change graduate education in these. If we could, one first step to start changing graduate education would be to think about how we could get these skills into graduate curricula. And so then we said, okay, we went back to Mel and we said, we have a plan. We have 4 pilot sites. They're going to do the hard work of figuring out how to do this in a department. They're going to look at their curricula. They're going to look at how students think about history, how students learn history. They're going to work with other parts of the university, maybe career centers, maybe centers for teaching and learning, maybe interdisciplinary centers. They're going to think how they can do internships. They're going to think about how they can rethink coursework, how they can integrate skills into courses, or how they can introduce new courses that are maybe clinic courses. And you heard about some of that yesterday at the lunch roundtable, but I'm sure lots of people here can tell you more about what Columbia is doing if you're interested. And then at the AHA level, we did a couple of things. Our job at the AHA is to tie this all together and to make these resources and these lessons available to as many historians as we can. And we're doing that mostly through our website. We have a regular series in our news magazine. We have a regular series on our blog. But the other big thing that we're doing that might be of interest to graduate students in the audience is I run a program called Career Contacts, which basically sets up low-stakes informational interviews between graduate students or early career historians and a history PhD employed beyond professoriate. And that's really easy. You can also sign up online. So that's how we got to where we are. That's what we're thinking about. So we're about halfway through our implementation grant, basically. This at the 4 pilot sites and thinking about what can happen next. And that's where we are. And I think now maybe is a good time to hear what VanWagoner is doing.
Sure. So again, I want to join Emily in thanking everyone for coming out early this morning. So the MLA got a similar grant to the AHA's original planning grant, and we also did a tracking project. When I say we, I mean the MLA, I was not yet there. But they did a tracking project where they tracked about 2,100 PhDs in languages and literatures who had gotten their PhDs between 1996 and 2011. And the results were remarkably similar to the AHA's results. The percentage of people who were entirely outside the academy was slightly higher. We were about 1/3 of people who were entirely outside the academy. But we also found that there was no one area to which people had gravitated. There were people employed in sort of administrative roles at universities as advisors, as librarians, as program managers. There were people in business, there were people in government, there were people at nonprofits. People were at all different types of organizations. And so it's interesting, one of the things that I get asked when I tell people what I do is, well, what do you do with a language and literature PhD if you're not going to become a professor? And I'm forced to say, well, there are many things, but everyone really kind of has to figure that out, which is one of our challenges. The other thing that I take away from the data that both MLA and AHA collected is that this is not really a new question at all. It sort of feels like it's new because it's being talked about openly for the first time, but this has been going on for many, many years, even when the economy was much, much better than it is currently. But I do think there does feel like there is a new urgency to it since 2008, and that is why this question has sort of come out in the open since then. If you want to look at the MLA's data, it is available online. David Lawrence, who is the director of research at the MLA, has a blog called The Trend. And if you Google David Lawrence, L-A-U-R, and The Trend, it pops up. So it's available there if anyone would like to take a look at it. We have a similar program. We have a similar setup to the AHA, but slightly different. We have 3 pilot programs across the country. One is at Georgetown, and they're taking a public humanities approach to this question. They're establishing a center, a public humanities center at Georgetown, and also thinking about what a public humanities PhD might look like. And then we have Arizona State University. They are really rethinking their doctoral programs to make them more purposeful and intentional, helping people really plan out their time in a thoughtful way, and also incentivizing good advising, which is a good mentorship, and rewarding that in a way that I'm not sure is generally rewarded within the academy. They're also getting their PhDs training in new skills, quantitative methods, as well as entrepreneurial training through their business school. So that's some of the things that they're doing. And then finally, the University of California Humanities Research Institute. They're housed at UC Irvine, but they are a UC-wide institution, and they run 2 workshops each year, one in Northern California and one in Southern California for graduate students, to talk about different types of skills, to talk about different types of careers, and they are also piloting a tracking project. So 2 departments at each UC campus will be piloting a tracking project to get some data, because tracking is one of the things that is really lacking in a lot of departments. Departments just don't know where people have gone. So there is no alumni network for people who are interested in jobs outside the academy, and I think that is a real problem. And then in addition to that, on top of tracking, the MLA is also attempting to zero in on that 1/3 of the people that we found who have gone outside the academy and figure out, okay, where are they really? And then also make contact with them and try and get them involved in the project. People are really eager to be involved. This is something that I have encountered over and over again. People are so happy when you contact them and say, hey, what are you doing? We're really interested. And they're really eager to help the people who are coming after them and help them have an easier time than they had with the transition. So one of the other differences between the MLA and the AHA is that we have, the MLA has a local initiative called the Pro Seminar on Careers. That is running here in New York this year for the first time. It will run again in 16-17 and again in 17-18. Ben, who is here, is part of that Pro Seminar. And what this is a group of 20 PhDs, and 20 PhD students and recent PhD recipients. We meet regularly in New York City with MLA staff. We meet 3 times in the fall, and we'll meet 3 times again in the spring. Our first meeting was at the MLA offices, but we are also meeting places such as New York Public Library. CUNY hosted us to talk about administrative careers. We're meeting with the Mellon Foundation next week. We're meeting at ACLS, and we're meeting at Bard High School Early College. So we're getting off-site and into these other places and talking to people on staff who have PhDs about what they do. We also talk a lot about skills. So for instance, we had a workshop on how to read a job ad, and we had a workshop on how to establish a professional web presence, one on how to use LinkedIn for networking. And then in addition to that, people are also going to other types of institutions and doing site visits there and doing informational interviews. And Ben will speak more about this, but the feedback that we've gotten from this is really positive so far. People feel like it's really given them a new confidence to go out and start doing something about their careers.
Hey Stacy, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I think it has been helpful to have different schools involved in this pro seminar rather than one school. Like, how has that conversation?
Oh yes, we have people. So we have 20 PhDs from 11 different institutions,
Right.
And I do think that has been hugely helpful because like the way that this is being handled at different institutions it varies wildly. And so I think it really, the cross-pollination, so to speak, between schools is really helpful. Students hear what's going on at other institutions. It's been helpful for me to speak with people from a wide variety of institutions and find out, so who's doing things that are working and who's doing things that are not working and who's just not dealing with the question at all. And there are schools in the New York area that fall into all 3 of those categories. Yes, but one of the things that we were surprised about when it came to the pro seminar selection was how many people applied. So we had 245 applications for 20 spots. And that shocked us. I thought we'd get 100. Other people on staff didn't think we'd get much more than the 20 we were looking for. And so it was really surprising when we ended up with more than 10 times as many applicants as we needed. And what we ended up, the people that we gravitated toward were the people who understood the stakes of this conversation. It was not just about, I need a job, although people do need jobs, and that's not a trivial thing, and work is what gives us purpose in life. And feeling like, and so when somebody says that when somebody trivializes that particular point, my reaction is no, we all want to feel purposeful, we all want to feel useful. That's work is what humans are meant to do in a way. But we gravitated towards people who also understood that this was about the role of the humanities in the public sphere. It was about the value of higher education and the value of advanced training in these fields. And that these were much larger conversations, of which I need a job is part of that, but that there were these broader issues at stake. And so the people who are in the pro seminar have a very deep and insightful understanding of that. And I encourage you to go to our website, which is connect.commons.mla.org, and look at some of or just Google Connected Academics, and look at some of the blog posts that pro seminars participants have been posting. We have several blog posts up there right now, and I think they are incredibly insightful and interesting, and really demonstrate a deep understanding of these larger stakes, which are the topic of our conversation today. So I think I will conclude. I'm happy to take questions during the Q&A about the program.
Thanks, Stacy. That's fantastic. And I think you and I later are going to have a brainstorming session where we basically steal each other's ideas.
Excellent.
That sounds fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do though now is hear from the other panelists who have been listening so patiently. Ben and Noah are, so Noah was one of the first to help start the History in Action movement at Columbia. So he's been involved for a while. And then Ben is, as Stacy just said, a participant in the MLA's Pro Seminar that's happening this year. So you've heard from the people who are thinking about this in a programmatic level, and now I'd like for you to hear from people who are participating at a participant level, although, you know, they're key to shaping what's happening. But I want to ask each of you if you could briefly say how you came to be involved in the projects that you're involved in, and how that is or is not related to why you came to grad school and what you saw your sort of project in graduate school. You can attack that any way you want.
Sure. It sprang up pretty organically for me. I think, you know, in the introduction, you graciously sort of gave my background, which is that I have a dual degree from Michigan in economics and English literature. And my research has always been an attempt to bridge these things in a way that is non-trivial. It's actually like really foundational and functional. So my experience at Columbia has been just casting about with the help of advisors and other graduate students, thinking really abstractly about the relationship between economic history and literary analysis. And in this case, I work on a really modern drama, so this means in like precise terms. I'm thinking about relationships in the Jew of Malta and like the East India Company and shipping, and trying to understand the productivity of applying a kind of literary analysis to these narratives. So the reason I wind up, you know, in connect with academics is that many of the concerns are the same. The concerns that my research actually holds are, in some sense, equally the concerns of these programs. How not just how do we bridge gaps between disciplines, but in what ways can the work that I do as a humanist, like as a literary scholar or dramatic scholar, or you know, and sometimes an economic historian, in what ways can those forms of analysis actually be productive outside of that limited sphere? So that's the intellectual background of bringing me into this work, certainly.
My story is much more prosaic, and it sounds like Ben, I was always interested in the intersection of certain kinds of ideas and the work that they did in the world. My historical work has always been in intellectual history, and one of the questions in intellectual history is not just how you get from one idea to another, but what the relationship is between the kinds of ideas that people might be thinking about, often at a very high level of culture, and things that are happening more broadly. I think for the kind of history and action stuff in particular, there's a much more immediate and concrete genesis. The part that comes out of the intellectual history work that I was doing was this book by Tom Bender called New York Intellect, which I was reading for a seminar. And over the course of this book, one of the things that he discusses is the way in which intellectual production became centralized in certain institutions in the United States, really at the end of the 19th century. And he's got this quote, actually, it's from the guy who was the president of Johns Hopkins, so Gilman, maybe, at the turn of the 20th century.
He has three names in one group. Yeah, they all have three names.
And he's saying something like, you know, he's some letter, and I look around at the city of Baltimore, and I think with pride about what we've accomplished at Johns Hopkins. You know, here's one of our PhDs who's the mayor, here's another PhD who's the head of the newspaper, here's another PhD running the sanitation department, here's one of us teaching, and that's exactly what this PhD that we've created, which later becomes this sort of doctorate in history, was all about. And I remember thinking to myself, how do we get from a world where that was sort of the vision of doctoral training in the social sciences and humanities to one where, you know, now your training as a doctor of history is really to become a professor of history. And of course, with historians, right, we know there's a story there about the expansion of the American university after World War II, but that only highlights the contingency, right? Had it not been for the GI Bill, would there still be a part of us that would be wanting to train PhDs to do all these other things? Because if that's the case, wow, you know, it certainly wasn't part of the framers of the GI Bill's project to change the way that PhDs in history understood what they were doing. So that was sort of one thing that was kicking in my mind. And then the other was the conference that we had here that the GHA organized when I was a first year or a second year. And David Cannadine came to talk about the public role of the historian. And David Cannadine is an eminent British historian. And coming out of an Oxford model, and I don't think I'm doing violence to his talk, he said, the role, you have to be careful because history doesn't actually have anything to say to public engagement. You guys are PhDs in history because unlike your classmates at insert elite university here, you couldn't cut it as a politician or a banker. But because you went to elite institutions, your friends who are politicians and bankers will become powerful, and eventually maybe one of them will appoint you to be chairman of the National Portrait Gallery, which David Cannadine is chairman of the National Portrait Gallery. I remember thinking like,
That's a career path. That's one.
I remember thinking, that can't be right, that's certainly not American. I don't think I've ever felt so proud of what it meant to be not a monarchist. And so I thought, okay, well, what is it? What's the rejoinder, right? What is it to say to him? No, there's a public value in the sort of work that we're doing that's not bound up with either having powerful friends or this very circumscribed thought in which your competence as a historian really just prepares you to help curate the portraits that other people should look at. And I think that was part of the spur that got me into talking with Professor Pamela Smith. Heard me complaining very unsportsmanlike at the actual lunch after David Cannadine's talk. She sort of nudged me in the buffet line and then called me to her office the next day and said, "Hey, we just got $10,000. What are we going to do with it?" So that's how I then turned these sort of nascent thoughts into this stream.
That wasn't very prosaic, Noah, I have to say.
I guess just listening to Ben talk about this totally intellectually fascinating confluence and thinking, wow, I just happen to be, in a room and angry.
So many things come from people being in a room and
Yeah,
angry.
do not
Do not
devalue the importance of being in a room and angry.
I mean, I think what has struck me listening to all of us talk about what we're doing here, and I guess knowing what I haven't said, is that so much of us, something Stacy said about the purpose of that work should be purposeful, that work is something that gives meaning to life, which I think is debatable, but is debatable among humanists, right? It's such a humanist question. And similarly, the way that Ben and Noah were talking about what got their intellectual juices flowing was thinking about intersections and unexpected crossings, which I think all of us have share that experience, that sense of, oh, what is that doing there? I need to know more, and then you're down the rabbit hole, and suddenly, in a grad program, hopefully with more purpose than that, but that also, this is an intellectual exercise as well as a practical professional one. And I think that this conversation, the intertwining of those two ways of thinking, of these two understandings of I need to feed myself, but I also would like to work for more than just food. I would like it to have some sort of purpose. That this is actually one of the things that's at stake here, one of the things that we're thinking about. So the title of this panel is The High Stakes of Humanities. The title of this conference is The High Stakes of History. And being among humanists, let's sort of embrace it for a second and let's engage in a little textual unpacking, which I'd love to do because I don't get to do it anymore, right? But the title is The High Stakes, and stakes is one of these words that is really useful because it has so many layers. It can have layers of meaning attached to it. So it usually means that there's some risk involved, right? That you're afraid of losing something. That's why there's high stakes, because you could win really big, but you could also lose something of great value. And so what I want to ask my fellow panelists is, what's risky about humanities work, both in the academy and outside of the academy? What is lost from the working world when humanists aren't there? Humanists and historians, all of us together. And what's lost in humanities departments without this professional conversation, which we have just sort of taken for granted that's intertwined, but isn't taken for granted everywhere. So what's at stake in having this conversation?
I have to jump in here because, of course, my dissertation is focused on risk, and thus I have a lot to say about this. I'll try to read. I think there's like 3 or 4 questions kind of living in this one. And the first one, which we've, on this panel we've talked about quite a bit, is the distinction between a working world and a world of research or a world of the humanities. And I think we all share this kind of gut reaction that, no, these two things are not distinct, that in many ways we share practices. And I want to say that, this, I think, is the truest answer. But I also, I was thinking about this earlier this morning, and I just want to observe something that we actually just spoke about, that the life of the working humanist is, in a practical sense, in organization, really different from many of our compatriots in industry. And that's something we actually shouldn't underestimate, that obviously a lot of the opportunities that we have as humanists to do a particular kind of research and to experience a particular kind of like organizational struggle.
What do you mean? Like in the hours or the kind of work or the work location?
All of these actually. So we were speaking about, you know, rising at 4 a.m. so that you can actually get work done and work of a particular kind, right? Work of a kind of intellectual intensity or a compositional intensity where you feel as though you're trying to put truth on paper, and that this has to be done in some like very focused way that is distinct, I think, from being in a boardroom or working as an engineer. I don't know, I'm not in a boardroom nor am I an engineer, but I wonder if this kind of distinction is true, but also like, I'm working on my dissertation right now, so there's a lot of angst about this, but the struggle to bring ideas together in this particular way, to create for myself a kind of network of thought, I do think that this is different in a lot of fortunate ways from what happens often in what we are thinking of as the working world. So I just want to, in terms of practices, in terms of the way that I spend time in the library, or the way that I'll spend a month just photographing manuscripts, like this is a unique and strange thing. So I just want to acknowledge this as actually a real difference in practice.
So one thing that's at stake is a definition of work and what work looks like and means.
Yeah, I think that's true. If we want to say that work in the humanities is like work in the working world, we can, but it does require us to kind of treat this work idea as malleable. Otherwise, I think we do have to distinguish them in a pretty important way. Let me just speak about the risk or what is at stake for just a moment. I want to bring up something that Gayatri Spivak said in a speech actually in 2013, which has been, and I don't think I've ever talked to you about this, Stacy, but this for me was one of the motivating factors behind joining Connected Academics. Spivak talks about the quiet, slow, silent work of the humanist as something almost, and I remember this in my application to the program, as a kind of research and development for ethics, and a research and development for the way that we move through the world, and something with an incredibly long, like it's a really long game. It's an extremely long game, a game in terms of hundreds of years. And I think that that's really easy to forget. We are interested so often in return on investment, and even in terms of this Mellon grant, return on investment within 10 or 20 maybe.
Try it in 3 years. I have to go to Mellon and something in 3 years.
And this is great, and this is great to
We did
find.
something.
But I do think that a lot of the work that we do as humanists doesn't have this kind of horizon. It in fact needs to have a horizon that is much more distant, and that needs to be somehow acceptable to us. So the risk that I would say, if we risk throwing away elements of this like cloistered, this vision of the humanities as a cloistered thing, that we risk bringing the horizon much closer. And I don't know that some of the recent and celebrated social change or legal change that we've seen in this country can happen without a very, very long horizon. Yeah, so.
No, you were going to jump in,
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what Ben's saying. I think that sort of, in terms of forms of life, it's really crucial. I guess I do feel though that we can meaningfully talk about something that's missing on a shorter time horizon also. There is a risk here. If any of you guys were at the very first History in Action panel, you remember our graduate guy at Hartman, he was at the Air Force Academy, Eric Firth, who said, one of the dangers in thinking about the application of different kinds of humanistic or historical work to policy is precisely that the instrumentalism of policy will contaminate it by shortening the horizon. As someone who was in the military and doing intelligence work, he actually was acutely sensitive to that because he was being forced to do that all the time. And I take Ben's point, I take Eric's concern sort of advisedly. That said, the fact that a lot of people who do humanistic work have been removed from some of these other places out there in the working world means that some of the skills that you might need to do those jobs well have been taken too. And the two that are always on my mind, one is just broadness of imagination, and the other has to do with appreciating rich interconnections. I think history is one of the only disciplines that takes seriously the idea that you can have causality without determinism. And that's a really powerful epistemological statement. And if we think about what it means to play that idea through, it actually has broad applications for the development of all sorts of human institutions or policies. If people aren't thinking about that kind of effect, they're just not going to be able to do a good job, or you have to be thinking about that kind of institutional development. And from intervening in wars to deciding how you're going to hire and create culture in a corporation. Those seem to me to be sort of prototypical but different examples of exactly that kind of problem. And then on the imagination side, and this I totally agree with Ben's point, I'm thinking a lot about the kinds of narratives. So I'm in law school right now. I'm thinking a lot about the kinds of historical narratives that are used to legitimize certain kinds of legal arguments. And they're really, it's not like a complicated connection. As far as an intellectual historian goes, it's a remarkably dumb, direct transposition. I tell you a story about the meaning of the Second Amendment. It changes the sorts of gun rights that Congress can regulate. And there's a need to be able to tell good stories. And if historians, we don't have to be the ones telling the stories to the judges, although we can talk about how we might do that, but we gotta be telling the good stories to somebody who can tell that story to the judge, or else I can tell you who tells that story to the judge, and it's not a good story. And whether it's gay marriage, or whether it's the relationship between social movements and government action, there are lots of places where those stories are directly affecting the kinds of legitimate action that can be taken. And I wouldn't want us to so be worried about our anti-enlightenment need to protect a form of non-instrumental life to forget the fact that if we completely withdraw or if we don't give ourselves the possibility of engaging in that way, there will be other consequences.
I want to jump in. I'm really glad you said this actually, and I think in particular what you're talking about in the imaginative opportunity of someone who has been, of the humanist, I guess we'll say broadly, in spheres outside of the academy. I very much agree with this, and I finally turned up my quotes from Swafford here, and I just want to share with you what she has thought of as the humanist. So the work that we might do either in industry or in the academy, she describes as like personal trainers in the gym of the mind, ceaseless, uncoercive rearrangement of desires, or imaginative training in the performance of knowledge. And I think that, so obviously this is very feedback, but I think this is something that can be productive, that's something that we can do in the academy in our particular kind of research. And as teachers, to inspire, and this is not quite like the quote from the British historian you were describing, but the influence of this kind of research. But it is something that can be either influential or directly important if I actually go elsewhere outside of the academy. There are opportunities for that either way, I hope.
I think it's a paradox of academic life that we constantly turn to non-academic life to have metaphors of what we're doing, what our work is, yet constantly saying, oh, it's not the same thing at all, yet that's the language we have to turn to explain what we're doing.
I was going to say that I was reminded, so we do draw this distinction between work out in the world and work in sort of the research that happens here at the university in this sort of, as Jill Laporte yesterday, in a bit of a monastic lifestyle on our island with lovely coconuts. And I think there is real risk, there is a danger involved in that. I'm reminded of an article that came out a few years ago in Forbes, and some of you might remember it, in which someone declared that university professor was the easiest job in the world, and received about 900 comments telling her why she was wrong, because she assumed that professors had summers off and 3 or 4 weeks at Christmas, and they didn't really have to, I remember her saying that professional conferences were optional, and it was just this complete misunderstanding of the research process and the work that research is. And so for me, one of the things that is at stake in this conversation is the relationship between the university and the rest of society. And the fact that if the university is sequestered and the research work that goes on at the university is sequestered, then the rest of the world doesn't understand what we do. And that work becomes entirely devalued. And this is actually not a problem that's unique to the humanities either. The theoretical sciences constantly fight this because their horizon is also very, very long.
Even the non-theoretical sciences. Yeah, it's not just.
Right, but I mean, I think the more theoretical, the more it's, the horizon for the application for this research might be a very long time away. I can't necessarily tell you how it's going to make money tomorrow, quote unquote. And that when that is the standard, yes, that becomes very difficult. world. But for me, definitely one of the things that is at stake is this relationship between higher education and society. And having professionally trained humanists, having PhDs in the humanities, doing other things. I don't want to say out in the world. I'm trying to eliminate that phrase from my vocabulary because the university is also the world. But having PhDs doing other things and having people who understand the value of what is done at universities doing other things will helps facilitate that relationship, I think. Yes.
Yeah, I want to jump in and say that I totally agree with this. We're talking about the relationship between the university and the world, and that it's sort of a fabricated division. It's not really. There's no there. Because one of the things that I started this roundtable by talking about. We had a problem we wanted to solve, and then along the way we sort of discovered other things that we realized we had to think about, or realizations we didn't expect. And one of these was within the AHA, and the pilot program's doing this because this is fundamental to what they're doing. When we found those 5 skills that PhDs beyond the academy needed to succeed beyond the academy: communication, collaboration, intellectual self-confidence, quantitative literacy, and digital engagement. I wasn't working at the AHA then, but this is how I see it in my head, that they wrote them on a whiteboard, classic, and they were sitting there looking at it thoughtfully. And suddenly this light bulb goes off, and they go, oh, you need those to be a good professor too. So that what we're thinking about, the questions that we're asking about, what does graduate education mean, what's the relationship between the university, the professor, the humanist, the historian, and the world, those are fundamental to graduate education, and they're not a distraction. It's not decoration. This is the foundation. And so what I want to ask you guys next is one thing that people are really worried about when we talk about changing graduate education, or we talk about what does it mean to be a humanist in the world, is what does it mean to be a humanist or a historian? And so when we were talking amongst ourselves about what do we want to talk about today, one thing we hit on so far we've been highlighting how the conversation that the MLA is having and the conversation that AHA is having are really similar. But one thing that we hit on is like a possible big difference is that historians have an identity as a historian. I can say, and that is in fact how I introduce myself to somebody that I don't know. So in DC, the question that everyone asks you, and it's terrible, and I try never to do it myself, but you're meeting someone the first time, let's say at a bar, at a coffee shop, I don't know, in line at the grocery store, and eventually you'll get around to one of the first questions is, so what do you do? And I always say, I'm a historian, because then I can get a gauge of how they react to that and decide what the follow-up question is. But would you say, I'm a humanist? How would you answer that question? And what's the stake of that conversation?
Not in line at the grocery store.
Is that New York DC difference, or just
I don't know. Ben has been living here for much longer than I have, so Ben could maybe speak to this. I would not. So I would say that my identity is definitely more as a humanist than as a literary scholar. I would definitely. I guess I am a literary scholar. That is, I'm much more inclined to describe myself as a humanist. But I don't. Maybe this is a New York DC difference. What do you think, Ben?
Well, I will say first, one does not speak in line at the grocery store. No, we should not.
That's snobbish.
But this is a really funny question for me, not particularly just for that, but because I have always answered this question in a way that really turns people on or off instantaneously. In some sense, like you say with this drawing, but my answer is generally something like, well, I work on connections between economics and drama. And so I communicate to them without preface that I am, to some extent, that I'm an academic or an intellectual, or maybe just some a crazy, a New York crazy. And I think I do this sort of decisively because I would like to communicate a kind of enthusiasm for this thing, and that it is possible to say I don't have a particular, I'm a professional in the sense that I'm doing research and making connections, and that I don't need to explain myself in another particular way.
Yeah, a historian actually dodges the question. It doesn't tell you anything about what I actually do.
But I was just going to say that I thought that that if you say historian, people do make sort of certain assumptions about the type of work.
Oh, they do.
Whereas if you say humanist, people are like, what does that mean?
So a follow-up question is often, so are you researching, or where do you teach, or so you work for the Smithsonian? And I'll be like, no, I don't, and then I have to explain the complicated job I have at AHA, but then I've got to,
it seems to be also, just to follow up on this, I guess, yeah, it seems, it's kind of a willful project for me, I guess, as you can gather, that I do this almost as a challenge to the people that I'm talking to. Not to test them necessarily, but to establish that there is an opportunity to think of some of these problems not as purely professional ones, but I guess in a very humanist mode as problems or issues that we can internalize in a bunch of different careers. So if I leave, with my PhD and go and work somewhere else, I would hope that I can say this sort of a similar thing, and not say, well, I'm a grant writer at such and such. I would hope to be able to say also what my intellectual focus actually is. And if this frustrates the question, I'm not particularly sympathetic. I feel as though it's very important to be able to communicate, as I keep saying, to communicate this kind of intellectual breadth or curiosity as a statement of purpose.
Noah, you probably have some interesting thoughts about identity since you're doing a joint PhD, JD. I know, I might be more to you.
No, I mean, I identify with what you say about feeling like a historian, and ironically, or maybe predictably, being in law school has made me feel more acutely what it means to think historically. I think one of the things that I think is interesting is that despite the diversity of historical approaches, I feel like we've all had to read That Noble Dream, and so we all have some sense of how many different things go under the rubric of historian. I nevertheless feel a tremendous kinship with other people who do history in a way that is maybe even broader than humanism or literature. So I would never, I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that to me it's a lot more to just know that somebody's in this field. And I'm trying to puzzle through why. And I think it has to do with temporality, with the fact that whatever else historians are up to, the thing that we have in common, and it does set us apart from a lot of other people as a group, is that we think that the fact that one event happens after another in time, or at the same time as another in time, has a kind of significance just in and of itself, so that you cannot say that something is the same if it happened at a different time. And I guess I come back to what is it? That's actually, we may not puzzle through it often, but that's a very strong philosophical commitment. And especially being in a law school, I'm struck by how many people don't share that and how odd it is. So, small example, in US law schools, one of the projects is to explain why we have the federalist system. And this is important because we have a constitution in which we continue to have a federalist system, and so you have to interpret the meaning of that federalist system. We all know why we have a federalist system, right? We have a federalist system because there used to be a federalist system and we haven't gotten rid of it. It endures in time as an institution. That's not a legal argument. No one in a court of law will ever acknowledge that fact. And so instead you have people preferring different explanations as if federalism were a static thing in time, right? How do we justify federalism today? What's a story about its virtues that we can use now? I think that way of thinking is actually, it's mind-boggling, and yet that's the dominant mode of analysis for this entire space. And I don't think it's exclusive to law. I think that lots of other places that take a more immediately, a non-temporal view of things. Meanwhile, if you take a temporal perspective, if you think that the moment it's happening or the duration is important, whether or not you have formal training in history, you become a kind of historian.
I just want to add to this, by tying this to some of my research actually. So the research that I do is born out of the financial crisis, like very, very directly, personally for me, in that part of my research is an attempt to explain the approach to financial risk that emerges in the English-speaking world around 1600. And this, like as I've been saying throughout, it's this incredibly long view, but it's one that acknowledges that financial crises as we understand them did not start in 2007, or in the Great Depression, or in any other distinct mode. So to ask, why did the financial crisis happen in 2007? Oh, it's the housing market. The kind of dissatisfaction with that answer, or constructing for a particular moment an answer. I completely agree with this, I share this. And it is odd to me, and I think it connects to the forms of research that are being done in particular fields. It is odd to me as well that there is either a temporal limitation or even a sort of theoretical limitation, like a limitation of approach. It's a different problem, I think, but when people approach a particular topic looking only at book history, or thinking only about, to skewer myself in some way, like performative theory, that this kind of limitation is not distinct from the temporal, and I completely agree with what you said.
So I think I'd like now to open it to questions from the audience, just so that I can follow through on our promise and the conversation. And so what's at stake for you in your identity as a historian, or what's at stake for you as a humanist?